Okay, let's unpack this. When you hear the word yoga, what typically comes to mind? Maybe physical posture, stretching, balancing, or just trying to touch your toes.
Hmm.
That's definitely a way yoga shows up in the world today, but according to the source material we're diving into for this deep dive, that physical aspect is actually a very small part of something much, much bigger and far more profound.
Exactly. The text we're exploring today is drawn from a technical guide on what's called the science of yoga. It presents yoga not just as philosophy or physical exercise, but as a rigorous, practical, and experimental science with one central aim: to understand and ultimately control the mind itself.
Right, this source material isn't about sort of nebulous ideas. It treats yoga as a systematic discipline, a living science passed down through an unbroken line of experts who constantly verify its principles through their own experience. It requires careful study, yes, but it's grounded in practice.
It's a path of internal exploration, verifiable from within.
So our mission in this deep dive is to cut through the density of this material, pull out the core concepts, and truly grasp what this ancient science is saying about the nature of the mind, the source of suffering, and the actual steps one takes on this systematic path to transformation. What is this yoga science really all about beyond the mat? Let's dive in.
Okay, to start at the absolute foundation, the text gives us the core definition right up front. Yoga is the suppression of the modifications of the mind. That's the key phrase. Citta, Vrtti, Nirodha.
Okay, let's break that down because those Sanskrit terms carry a lot of meaning here. Citta is the mind principle itself, the broader mental apparatus, right?
Correct.
And Vrttis, the text tells us it comes from a root meaning to exist.
Yes, Vrttis are the modifications, states, or functionings of the mind, essentially. All the ways the mind exists or expresses itself. Everything from thoughts and emotions to perceptions and memories. So yoga is the process of bringing these fluctuations under control, quieting them.
And the profound result of this suppression, what happens when the mind's constant churning is quieted?
The text explains that when these modifications are suppressed, the true self, the seer, which it calls purusa, becomes established in its own pure nature, svarupa. This isn't something you can know by thinking about it or, observing it from the outside. It's a state of direct self-realization, known only from within one's own being.
The simile the text uses is really helpful here. Imagine the mind's modifications as agitated water churning around an electric bulb at the bottom of a lake. The bulb, the seer, is there, but it's hidden by the turbulent water. When the water becomes perfectly still, when the mental modifications are suppressed, the bulb's light becomes clearly visible.
Precisely. And this state of calm water, or suppressed modifications, is the goal achieved through intense non-attachment, called paravairajya, and through the practice of deep absorption samadhi, which is really the culmination of the path.
So the what is controlling the mind? Now, let's get to the why. Why pursue this difficult path of stilling the mind? The text says it's all based on understanding the source of suffering, which it frames through the theory of klesas.
The afflictions. And here is one of the most surprising and counterintuitive insights from this text, something that really challenges our everyday perception. The central idea is that all experiences, even those we chase as pleasurable in our ordinary lives, are actually seen as painful from the perspective of someone with developed spiritual discrimination.
Painful. Even pleasure. That feels very radical. Why would the text say that?
Because, according to this science, the fundamental root cause of all suffering is avidya, ignorance, or lack of awareness of reality. Avidya is the master klesa. It blinds us, makes us mistake the temporary and conditional for the permanent and real, causing us to crave things that ultimately lead to pain or dissatisfaction when they inevitably change or disappear. All the other klesas and the cycle of karma they create are rooted in this fundamental ignorance.
Okay, so avidya is the big one. What are the others derived from it that causes so much trouble?
Well, the text lists asmita, which is egoism, our identification with our temporary vehicles like the body and mind, thinking, this is me. Then raga, attachment or attraction to things we like. Dvesa, repulsion or aversion to things we dislike. And apinavesa, a deep-seated will to live or clinging to life, even fear of death. The text notes just how powerful abhinavesa is, affecting even those considered learned.
Wow.
These are the primary drivers of our mental agitation and the cycle of suffering.
Got it. The klesas explain why we suffer. Now, let's understand what is happening in the mind itself. The text uses the concept of Vrttis again here, the mental modifications. What exactly are these modifications that need to be suppressed?
Everything that passes through our consciousness as an experience is a mental modification. The text classifies them in two main ways. First, simply as painful and not painful, which aligns with the Klesa theory that even seemingly pleasant experiences contain the seed of future pain.
And the second way is by the nature of the pratyaya, the content within the mind.
Yes. You have objective Vrttis, which involves some contact with an external object. This includes pratyaksa, direct perception through the senses, anumana, inference, indirect contact, like seeing smoke and inferring fire, and agama, testimony from a trusted source, also indirect contact.
And then the subjective Vrttis, where there's no external object involved, the mental image is purely internal.
Exactly. These are creations within the mind itself. Viparaya is wrong knowledge or misconception when your mental image doesn't match reality.
Like a mirage.
Sort of, yes, or just fundamentally misunderstanding something. Then vikalpa is fancy or imagination conjuring images or ideas through words, but without any real substance behind them.
Okay.
Nidra is sleep, and the text defines it not just as absence of activity, but as a modification involving a cognizance following emptiness, meaning there's still a state of awareness, but of the lack of mental content.
Interesting.
And sturti is memory, the reproduction in the mind of something previously experienced. Understanding these categories helps us, dissect the constant flow of our mental landscape.
So we understand the problem, suffering rooted in klesas, and what makes up the mind's activity, Vrttis. Now the big question, the how. How does this science of yoga actually work in practice? What's the path it proposes?
This text is very clear. Yoga is a practical experimental science, and it demands wholehearted application. It's not a casual pursuit. It's serious business requiring dedicated effort.
And it outlines essential conditions for success for anyone attempting this path. The first is faith.
Not just blind belief, but a deep confidence in the potential mastery within oneself and within the teachings presented by the source, coupled with a willingness to make the necessary effort and sacrifices.
Then, indomitable energy or will, called virya.
This is crucial because the path is difficult, progress can be slow, and the goal is largely unknown and intangible to the beginner. Without this persistent energy, frustration can easily lead to giving up.
Yeah, I can see that. Memory snare tie is also listed as a condition.
Yes, but not just remembering facts. It's the capacity to retain lessons from one's own experiences and practice. This is vital for the state called Samadhi prajna, where the mind turns inwards and is absorbed in the deeper problems and realities the practice reveals.
And finally, keen intellect or high knowledge, prajna.
This sharp, insightful faculty is needed for Samadhi prajna, which the text says actually precedes the deepest state of absorption, Samadhi itself. So intelligence matters.
Okay, so those are the internal qualities needed. What about the active practices? The text introduces Kriya Yoga as preliminary training.
Kriya Yoga means action yoga, and it's presented as fundamental, not secondary. Its purpose is to attenuate the klesas, to weaken those afflictions we talked about, and to bring about samadhi. It has three components: tapas, svadhyaya, and isvarpanatana.
Tapas is austerity. The text links this to purifying the body and bringing it under the control of the will.
Yes, tolerating extremes like heat or cold, engaging in self-discipline. It makes the physical body fit and ready for the rigors of intense practice, basically building resilience.
Svadhi is self-study.
This involves studying texts like the one we're exploring, reflecting deeply on the fundamental problems they raise, and often involves the constant use of mantras or prayers to purify the subtle mental vehicles. It prepares the ground and the mind for real knowledge to arise,
Makes sense. And Isvara Pranayana, devotion to Isvara.
This is a deep process described as dedication of one's actions to Isvara, a concept referring to a supreme reality or divine principle, and ultimately merging one's individual satasciousness into that supreme will. The text says this specific practice can itself lead directly to samadhi.
Wow.
It presents Isvara as the ultimate teacher, the source of inner illumination, whose designator or symbol is the sound Om.
The text touches on the theory behind mantra yoga here, suggesting Om is the fundamental vibration underlying all phenomena.
Right. The practice of repeating this mantra, japa, and intensely meditating on its meaning, bhavana, is a way to connect with that divine consciousness. It's about resonance.
Beyond these preliminary Kriya Yoga practices, the text lays out a foundational ethical code, Yama and Niyama. It calls this a drastic ethical code, essential for any progress in the higher stages of yoga.
It's quite demanding, and these two aspects are deeply interrelated. Yama refers to prohibitions, things to abstain from. Ahimsa, nonviolence, not just physical. Satya, truthfulness. Asteya, non-misappropriation, Brahmacharya, conservation of vital energy, not just celibacy, and aparigraha, non-possessiveness.
And these 5 form a great vow to be practiced strictly everywhere, regardless of circumstance or place. That sounds intense. Can you give us a quick example from the text to illustrate one?
Yeah.
Like asteya or aparigraha.
Sure. The text broadens the definition beyond simple theft. Asteya, non-misappropriation, could include something subtle like taking gratification for doing your duty, essentially stealing the inherent reward of the action itself by attaching ego to it.
Okay, I see.
And aparigraha points out that accumulation, whether it's possessions or even knowledge or subtle powers, inevitably brings worry and anxiety, creating mental disturbance. Brahmacharya is strongly linked to conserving the psychical energy needed for spiritual regeneration, not merely physical restraint.
Then are the niyamas, the observances, things to cultivate. Sauka, purity. Santosa, contentment. Tapas, austerity, which appears in both lists, interestingly.
It has both restraining and cultivating aspects.
Svataya, self-study, also repeated.
Yeah.
And Isvara pranidhana, devotion.
Sauka includes physical and mental purity, which can even lead to a natural disinclination towards intense physical contact for advanced practitioners. Santosa, contentment, is highlighted as the source of superlative happiness because chasing external desires is seen as the root of unhappiness. If you're content, you're already happy, right?
Right. And what if, while trying to live by these strict ethics, improper thoughts or doubts arise? The text mentions dealing with vitarka.
Vitarka is that internal questioning or vacillation between alternatives when you're trying to uphold an ideal like nonviolence or truthfulness in a difficult situation. It's the mental argument, you know?
Yeah.
The technique the text prescribes for dealing with this is pratipaksa bhavana, pondering the opposite, consciously dwelling on the benefits of the ethical choice and the drawbacks of the improper thought or action. You actively cultivate the positive alternative.
So we have the ethical foundation, the preliminary practices, the conditions for success, but the path isn't smooth, as you said. The text describes the normal condition of the ordinary mind as viksepa, distraction.
Yes, it's the mind being habitually outward turned and scattered. That's sort of the default state for most of us. The text lists 9 obstacles that arise from this state. Some of the key ones are disease, which pulls attention constantly to the body, stagnation, a feeling of just not making progress, hitting a wall, pain and misery, directly linked back to the klesas, and restlessness, the sheer inability to keep the mind steady.
How does the text suggest overcoming these obstacles? Is it just willpower?
Well, willpower, Virya, is key, but the core solution offered is developing a strong concentration of purpose. Directing your mental forces with intense focus helps to polarize them and makes these various difficulties diminish or disappear over time. It's about focused energy.
And there are some preliminary techniques mentioned to help quiet the mind, right? Before the really deep stuff.
Briefly, yes. Focusing on pleasant or serene states of consciousness, finding that inner calm, or techniques involving focusing on subtle internal sounds or lights, sometimes called laya yoga, are mentioned as methods to make the mind steady and tranquil, helping to overcome distraction.
Okay.
The text also notes the importance of choosing a method that aligns with your temperament, sometimes suggesting this preference can even stem from tendencies carried over from past lives, so find what works for you.
Once the mind is somewhat steadied and basic obstacles are being addressed, we move to the core internal practices. These are the higher stages, called antaranga yoga, leading towards samadhi.
These require considerable proficiency in the prior steps, like the yamas and niyamas. You can't really jump ahead. These 3 stages are actually practiced together simultaneously on a single object or point of focus, a combined practice called samyama.
Okay, samyama. What are the 3 stages within it? The first is dharana, concentration.
This is the act of fixing the mind on a single point, whether internal or external. It requires effort, alertness, and attention, and distractions can still interrupt this focus. It's like holding on to something mentally.
Then comes dhyana, contemplation.
Here, the focus becomes effortless. It's an uninterrupted, continuous flow of the mind towards that object. The distractions are gone, the effort drops away, and the mind is fully engaged, getting ready for the next step.
And finally, samadhi, absorption.
This is the same continuous contemplation, but something profound shifts. Here, your consciousness becomes only of the object of meditation. The text says you lose consciousness of your own mind being conscious of the object.
Ah, that's the crucial distinction the text highlights. Our mind normally interposes itself, its own subjectivity, its self-consciousness, between us and the reality of what we're perceiving. It's like a veil, isn't it?
Exactly. Samadhi occurs when this self-consciousness vanishes and the mind becomes like a void, or sunyam, in relation to itself. This allows the true reality, the inherent nature of the object of meditation, to shine through directly without the filter of our own mental processes. Think of a musician completely lost in the music, or an inventor so absorbed in a problem they forget themselves entirely. It's a glimpse of that state of absorption.
The text also distinguishes between different kinds of samadhi. There's true samadhi versus jhana samadhi. What's the difference there?
Jhana samadhi is like a deep, unconscious trance state, almost like sleep. You might seem absorbed, but you don't gain any real insight, awareness, or transcendent peace. True samadhi brings illumination and profound realization. It's conscious absorption.
Okay, and there are stages within true samadhi, like sabija with a seed and nirbija without a seed.
That's right. Sabija samadhi is when the absorption is still focused on an object or concept associated with prakriti, the world of matter and phenomena. There's still a seed or object for the mind. Nirbija samadhi, the objectless state, is the highest, representing the final stage where the goal is absorption into the purusa, pure consciousness itself, beyond all objects.
Now, when you practice dharana, dhyana, and samadhi together on the same object that combine practice, samyama, what comes from that?
Yes, samyama is the key that unlocks deeper knowledge and capabilities. By focusing this concentrated attention through these stages, you can penetrate different layers of consciousness and reality associated with that object. It's like a focused beam of consciousness.
And from samyama arise the siddhis, the attainments or powers.
These are remarkable abilities that can manifest as a result of mastering samyama. The text notes that powers can sometimes arise in other ways, from birth due to past lives, or even temporarily through things like drugs, though that's considered a lower grade.
Right.
But samyama is presented as the superior method because it brings more permanent powers based on understanding the underlying natural laws. It comes from mastery, not accident.
But here's where the text offers a really critical caution.
Yeah.
These powers, as incredible as they sound, are actually obstacles to samadhi and the ultimate goal of liberation if the practitioner becomes attached to them or uses them for selfish, outward-turned purposes.
Precisely. That's a huge warning in the text. The path is towards internal freedom, not external power or recognition. Chasing siddhis for their own sake is a major sidetrack, a distraction from the real goal, which is enlightenment or Kaivalya.
Still, some of the examples of siddhis mentioned in the text are truly mind-bending, like knowing the past and future.
The text says this comes from performing samyama on the three transformations of the mind: nirodha, suppression, samadhi, absorption, and ekagrata, one-pointedness, essentially understanding the very process of change itself, the sequence of moments.
Or comprehending the sounds uttered by any living being, like Dr. Doolittle.
Well, maybe. It's described as being achieved through samyama on the fundamental principle of sound, the sabda tanmatra, understanding the essence of sound itself.
And the one that always grabs attention? Invisibility. How does the text explain that? Is it like a cloaking device?
Not exactly. It describes performing samyama on the quality of light, the rupa tanmatra, which somehow suspends the perceptibility of the body, disrupting the contact between the observer's eye and the light reflecting off the yogi's body. It's about manipulating the principle of form and light.
And akasagamana, walking through space. This text doesn't explain it in a simple way, does it?
No, it's quite profound. It's described not as creating a copy of the body, but involving the dissolution of the original physical body into akasa, the principle of ether or space, and then reconstituting it elsewhere.
Wow.
This is done through samyama on akasa and gaining mastery over the subtle light body. It's presented as a direct result of becoming one in consciousness with the principle of space itself. Very advanced stuff.
Absolutely. Beyond these practices and powers, the text lays out a deeply philosophical view of reality that underpins the entire system. We've mentioned purusa and prakriti. Let's revisit that.
Right. Purusa is pure, unchanging consciousness, the seer. Prakriti is the dynamic world of matter and phenomena, everything that is seen, arising from the interplay of three fundamental qualities called the Gunas.
And the purpose of their interaction.
The text states the very purpose of their apparent union is twofold. To provide experience for the purusa, yes, but ultimately to lead to its liberation from identification with prakriti. Prakriti, in essence, exists to serve the journey of the purusa back to its own nature.
And the gunas, these are fundamental.
Absolutely fundamental. These are the three qualities. Sattva, illumination, lightness, clarity, associated with pleasure. Rajas, activity, motion, passion, associated with pain. And tamas, inertia, darkness, resistance, associated with delusion. The entire manifested universe, including our minds and bodies, is seen as a combination and fluctuation of these three principles.
The text connects these gunas to the stages of Samadhi, showing different levels of reality, doesn't it?
Yes. The gunas manifest in stages from the most gross or particularized visesa to the most subtle or undifferentiated alinga. These stages correspond to the different levels of samprajñata samadhi, showing how consciousness engages with or transcends different grades of material reality. For instance, the vitarka stage of samadhi deals with the grossest level, visesa, while higher stages like vikara deal with more subtle universal principles, visesa, leading towards the ultimate undifferentiated state, alinga, which corresponds to asmita samadhi. It's a map of consciousness interacting with matter.
The text also applies this guna framework to understanding things like the Buddha's elements and indriyas, sense organs, forms. How does that work?
They are seen not just as physical things, but as principles of cognition and action operating on all planes of existence, structured by the gunas. Samyama on these principles gives the yogi mastery over natural phenomena, which the text contrasts with modern science's more, let's say, surface-level understanding of nature. It's about grasping the underlying principles.
Circling back to suffering, the text delves deeply into the cycle of karma and vasanas. How does that fit in?
Well, the text explains that as long as the klesas that root ignorance, avidya, and its derivatives like attachment and aversion are present, karma continues to ripen, leading to experiences, births, and lifespans.
Yeah.
Our actions, thoughts, and feelings create samskaras, deep impressions on the mind stuff, and these build up into vasanas, underlying tendencies or latent desires, which are the driving force perpetuating this cycle. These vasanas need specific conditions to manifest in any given incarnation, which explains why certain traits appear at certain times.
And the text suggests the individual soul, the jivatma, has a permanent memory of this entire journey, unlike our limited brain memory.
Yes, the individuality, the enduring self, retains a complete record in its subtler vehicles, seeing the whole sweep of lives, the big picture, unlike the limited memory tied to the temporary physical personality in one life.
What about the idea of niskama karma, action without personal desire? Can ordinary people do that?
The text posits that true niskama karma, action completely free from the ego's desire for results, is only genuinely possible for highly advanced yogis who have profoundly transcended the sense of a separate I acting in the world.
So, for most people,
ordinary attempts at desireless action often still have subtle egoic motivations underlying them, even if unconscious. Real freedom from results comes from freedom from the ego identifying with the action.
Here's where the text gets really profoundly philosophical and truly challenging to our normal way of thinking. It discusses the very nature of reality and time.
This is a key insight, yes. The text proposes that there is an unchanging reality, the purusa essentially, underlying the constantly changing world we perceive, prakti, and the seemingly continuous phenomena we experience, and even time itself as we perceive it, are actually illusions.
Illusions?
Yeah.
How so? That's a big claim.
They're described as being created by the rapid, sequential succession of discrete moments or subtle state changes of the gunas. It's like individual frames flashing on a film reel, creating the illusion of continuous motion.
Okay.
The text calls this sequence krama. Change isn't a smooth flow, but a rapid jump between these subtle states, and this change is fundamentally mechanical, inherent in the gunas. The yogi, by transcending the fluctuations of the mind which perceive this sequence, also transcends this illusion of linear time.
And consciousness itself. How does the text understand it in relation to the mind and reality? Where does consciousness reside?
The purusa, pure consciousness, is presented as the real perceiver, the unchanging light that illuminates the mind, which is itself considered inert, part of prakti. The mind, in this view, is perceivable. You can direct your attention inwards and observe your own mental processes, thoughts, and feelings.
So the mind isn't the ultimate source of awareness.
No, the mind is the instrument, illuminated by the purusa, and the state of pure consciousness the yogi seeks. The text suggests this pure consciousness can only know itself directly when it is freed from identification with the mind and turns inwards upon itself. It's not something another mind can perceive or objectify.
And this ultimate state?
This ultimate state of pure consciousness, the supreme reality attained in Kaivalya, is implicitly referred to in terms that align with the concept of the divine or God. It's the source.
Which finally brings us to the culmination of this entire science and path. The end game, so to speak.
Yes, the ultimate goal, Kaivalya. The text mentions Dharma Mega Samadhi, the cloud of virtue samadhi, as the final stage of absorption, specifically Asamprajnata Samadhi, that removes the last, most subtle obscurations and impurities from the consciousness. It's like the final polish.
And this leads to Kaivalya, often translated as isolation or aloneness. What does that really mean?
It signifies the state of absolute isolation, or, maybe better, the perfect distinction and freedom of pure consciousness, the Purusa, from Prakriti, the world of matter and its modifications, the very seed of bondage, even the subtle attachments to transcendent powers or knowledge, is destroyed.
So the Gunas just stop.
They resolve back into their latent state, having fulfilled their purpose of providing experience and liberation for that specific Purusa. They cease to present themselves to the Purusa as objects of experience. The show is over for that consciousness.
And the result of this isolation, what's it like?
Freedom, complete freedom from the dance of the gunas and the illusion of conditioned reality. The text describes it as a sudden expansion into infinite knowledge, dwarfing any knowledge gained through the limited mind. The Purusa is established in its own form, completely free.
Can such a being still act in the world?
Yes, the text suggests that even if a Kaivalya yogi continues to interact with the world, perhaps out of compassion, they can use their vehicles, mind, body, etc., without any identification or generating new karma. It's a perfectly free and conscious association, no longer bound by prakti.
Wow. Okay. We've really taken a deep dive into this ancient text, moving from the fundamental definition of yoga as mind control, understanding the source of suffering through the lens of the klesas and avidya, dissecting the nature of the mind's modifications, the Vrttis, laying out the rigorous ethical and practical path of Kriya Yoga, Yamas and Niyamas, identifying the obstacles on the way and how to address them, detailing the stages of concentration, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, leading to samyama, and the resulting powers and their dangers.
Right, the seed.
And finally, touching on the profound philosophical ideas of Purusa, Prakriti, the Gunas, the cycle of karma and vasanas, the mind-bending idea of reality and time as illusion, the nature of consciousness, and the ultimate goal of absolute freedom in Kaivalya.
This text genuinely positions yoga not just as a spiritual philosophy or a set of physical exercises, but as a comprehensive, practical, you could say, internal science for understanding and fundamentally transforming consciousness itself, leading to a state described as one of profound freedom, infinite knowledge, and liberation from suffering. It's a complete system.
So here's something to really ponder from this deep dive, something to maybe chew on. What if the text is right? What if the world and even time as we perceive it are not a solid, continuous flow, but essentially an illusion created by rapid-fire, discrete moments like a film reel? What does that profound concept suggest about the nature of reality, the potential of consciousness, and our place within it if we could truly perceive beyond the surface modifications of the mind? Just for a moment, something to think about.